Hey darlings. It is already the second day that Yegor has been on the train for more than hours, and he will be at home, as he misses his family in his native village. It's a good thing he's not celebrating this new year in a smoky trailer with men. But at home, after all, he has been in shifts for 5 years already, and this is the first time when suddenly the owner of the holiday let him go. Egor was happy and a little sad looking at the huge teddy bear that was sprawled on the third shelf. He removed everything. He even hung a small Vanka for his 4-year-old son. The boy will be surprised by such a big toy. To the beast, who is your son or daughter? Asked fellow traveler Andrei. Also works in shifts only Andrei, Sergut, and Egor. After all, in Neftyuginsk he worked on a train tractor. They met the son, answered Egor with a smile. And my son and daughter, nodded Andrei too. I'm bringing them gifts, it's true. There's such a big doll. Yes, car on remote control for my wife. Here's another fur coat. What are you going to give your wife in the new year? I don't have a wife, said Egor after a brief silence. She died. I'm sorry. Andrei touched his shoulder sympathetically. Perhaps the traveling companion wanted to know what happened to Egor's wife. I didn't say much on the way. And then Andrei didn't say anything, looked expectantly at his traveling companion and, realizing that he wouldn't achieve anything, went into the vestibule, and Egor just sighed and looked out the window. A landscape similar to his native expanses was already shining, and Egor was thinking about his own memories, music, with Tanya. They were friends from the first grade. They lived next door. Then the first love completely covered them. Somewhere in the 9th grade, the parents then, oh, how they fought. They were afraid that their children would want to try before adulthood. They just ignored that they were completely or something. Yes, and how could Yegor offend his Tanya? Insult him, you can't pick a butt ahead of time. He remembered hearing this phrase, liked it, and treated Tanya like a pure flower and brilliant. They had nothing at school, although everyone in the area had been teased by the grooms for a long time. After school, Tanya entered medical school, and Egor wanted to enter a technical university. But he failed and went into the army, and after parting they had one night, the only one covered in secret of all. Then Tanya and Egor ran from the guests at the table to the lake, and there in the hut everything happened to them. Will you wait for me? Asked Egor, hugging the girl. After all, we are together now. And Tanya whispered to him, forever. 2 army years passed in languor, waiting for as many letters as Tanya wrote to Egor. None of the soldiers in the unit received any. The guys were even jealous, and Egor even envied himself, and was afraid lest they should be jinxed by demobilization. He was driving home, and he himself mentally urged the train to move forward. But why is Tanya the first to touch him on the neck? Yegor ran up, grabbed her in his arms, kissed her. Then they came to their senses, and Tanya blushed and turned away from Yegor, looking at the guy's parents, Terry, also standing nearby. And Yegor's mother was already just smiling, and too, your father. But the son chose a good girl for himself from childhood. So he had an eye on the wedding in their village. So, half of the villagers congratulated the newlyweds exactly on that day, and people walked. It was fun, and Yegor danced. They were the happiest. Their family life began, and they imagined that it was cloudless and joyful, that Tanya had already graduated by that time. Technical school, she was sent to her native village as a paramedic at a local factory. Yegor got a job as a tractor driver on a collective farm. Her parents contributed and bought a house for the young people, and her family life flowed. Oh, how happy Tanya was when 2 months later she realized that she was pregnant. Tanyash, and I definitely couldn't believe everything. Yegor definitely laughed. Tanya, after all, she herself is a doctor, yes, and I have already been in the district clinic for weeks. Tanechka, my dear, how I love you, Yegor exclaimed, turned his wife in his arms. She laughed and kissed him on the top of the head. And then that terrible incident. In the fall, this happened. Tanya was returning home after a call when a huge dog jumped out of a dark alley and ran towards the pregnant woman. And the due date was already about months away. Soon, on maternity leave, the dog ran. Tanya pushed her and fell, No one knows what else he did. Only the dog owner jumped after him. Peter pulled him and apologized for a long time for not noticing how Alibi broke free from the chain. Tanya listened and held her belly. So as Peter screamed, he pulled the dog home and called an ambulance. The doctors arrived quickly and took Tanya away, but nothing more could be done. Had to, their daughter died in the womb. So Tanya was forced to give birth to a stillborn child. It was scary. It was very, very scary. Usually when a woman gives birth, she knows that pain will be followed by pain. Joy of meeting your loved one. And then only death after this incident. Tanya took a long time to come to her senses, crying. Yegor suffered, blamed himself for not having met my wife that night in the collective farm hangar. Until it got dark, I was digging with the tractor if it wasn't loaded, and then everything happened. But a year later, joy. A new pregnancy this time. She wasn't more careful than before. Egor accompanied her to work and picked her up from work when he could, of course, but he tried and everything went well. It was only in the 6th month that there was bleeding for no reason, and Tanya lost it. Their son, they were supposed to have a son, but this never happened. In Egor's tears again, I managed to calm my wife, even though my heart was torn apart with pain. They survived this pain at work and in business. Everything seemed to be forgotten after 1 year into a new pregnancy. Tanya didn't tell anyone anything until her belly appeared. Only Egor knew about it and went to register and the doctors scolded Tanya. They say that she herself is a doctor, and you are behaving irresponsibly. Tanya just nodded in response, and what can you say? Her colleagues will not understand when there have already been 2 unsuccessful pregnancies. You involuntarily became superstitious, and then Tanya was able to carry and give birth to their daughter alive and healthy, as they thought at first. But Alyanushka was only a day old when she just didn't wake up. She died in the hospital. Infant death syndrome. It seemed like they would go crazy. Tanya, they turned black with sadness and started drinking with pride, and only the support and help of their parents helped them to shake themselves off. The doctors convinced Tanya and Egor to go to the city to be examined. The doctors revealed some rare pathology. In principle, Egor cannot give birth to a viable child from him. Of course, there is a chance that the baby will be born healthy, but this is only in theory. The doctor at the genetic laboratory told him honestly. So how much? Egor asked. What the doctor didn't understand is the percentage of what can be born from me. A healthy child, and he will be able to live and develop normally with pain in the voice. Yegor asked the question. 1%. No more. The doctor answered with his eyes downcast. After that trip, Yegor was not himself. He considered himself inferior, flawed again. He took the bottles now. He didn't feel sorry for Tanya. What kind of man is he when he can't have children? And he sang in black and walked away. Tanya from himself. Leave me, he shouted at her. You can still meet her like a normal man. You will have a son. And with me you will only cry and not leave in the morning. Gave him hangover pills and went to work where he forgot a little, and in the evening again Egor with his shows. No one knows how it would end, but after another misfortune came and knocked down another like a wedge with a wedge. They crashed into Yegor's parents' car, lost control on a slippery road, and he and his mother were killed by this pain, as if they were sober. Raised Yegor. He realized how ugly he was behaving lately. Like a rag. His parents knew. They were upset. He will not dishonor our mouth and his memory, and I have kept my word. I went back to the job I was kicked out of for absenteeism when I started drinking. He understood that Tanya was also thinking about it, and one day he proposed to her. Tanya, and you cheated on me. He said that one night. Tanya was just washing the dishes when she heard these words. She looked at her husband in confusion. The glass jumped out of her hands and broke with a bang. What you were saying? She whispered, paler. You drank again, not a drop. He shook his head. I'm serious, Tanya. I know how much you want a child, and I do. It doesn't happen. It didn't work out for us. Yes, I told you to leave me. I'm sorry emotionally. I can't do this without you, and I can't do this without you. My dear, Tanya replied with a sob and sat next to Yegor and laid his head on her shoulder. We are like two halves together, Tanya, and we will remain together. You just found someone who is pregnant. I won't even say a word to you, yes. I don't even need to know anything, Tanya. I won't stop loving you. We will continue to live together and raise our baby. We will come to an agreement. Tanya raised her head and looked seriously at Yegor. I didn't hear anything like that, and don't even think about me like that. I never cheated on you and I won't cheat on you. I love you, and only you don't have children, and we won't have to live together. Egor let me down, to be honestly. He was waiting. I was happy to hear those words from my wife, but at the same time it was so painful. That's why it happens in life. Two people who sincerely love each other, they can be truly happy, and it feels like time has passed together. More dancing. Egor didn't try to have a child, Tanya. I started taking medicine. I calmed down and Egor forgot that year again. It turned out to be difficult at first. Tanya's father died of illness. Then the collective farm collapsed and went bankrupt, guys. They were left without work, including Egor, but then a new farmer came. He started recruiting people, but he paid so much kopecks that normal workers only turned in Visk. It is possible to work almost for free as a worker for the left uncle. Men migrated to the north, yes, in shifts, and Egor also found an advertisement in the newspaper that tractor drivers were needed in the north and got ready to go there, and the waste supported him. I saw that Egor was without him, is languishing at work, yes, and he is ashamed. It seems that he is the head of the family, but he is sitting on his wife's neck, and before leaving, she told Tanya Egor some unexpected news about her position. How did Yegor get so confused? And I stopped taking the pills, admitted Tanya. Tanya, why did Yegor look at his wife with despair? You know how this will end. Why are you torturing yourself? Tanya whispered to you then. Of having a healthy child is only 1%. A full 1%. Tanya looked at it, and I believe we will succeed either way. Leave Tanya with her, because now it would be difficult, but Tanya assured him that she could handle it. And if anything helps your mother, Olga Vasilyevna, you go and don't worry about anything. She smiled at him. I am strong. I can handle it. You are my onion. He smiled in response and hugged his wife tightly for him to say goodbye. He punished Tanya 1,000 times to take care of herself. Olga Vasilyevna took her brains out to take care of her daughter. Both women nodded in response and fully agreed. Yes, they were also worried about the past losses. They were still in their memory. Hope. What if 1% of Tanya believed in Olga Vasilyevna, where she should go, also supported her daughter, and Egor believed? After 3 months, he arrived a month later. At home, Tanya gained weight. The pregnancy became more beautiful. She was going to have a boy. Egor, Tanya didn't. They didn't even talk about what the son's name would be. Each of them prayed for that 1%. And then Egor took Tanya to the city. 5 months before giving birth, doctors placed her in the city's perinatal center for preservation. And Egor himself went on duty and called his wife every day. The pregnancy was proceeding normally. And now our ex had come. Egor felt that Tanya was going into labor, and some kind of excitement appeared in his heart. Tanya's phone started ringing and became silent. She called her mother. I still don't know anything, Olga Vasilyevna answered in tears. They said that they had just taken her to the hall, and for almost a day nothing was heard. After Tanya, an SMS arrived. Our dear boy was born. Everything was fine. Egor was so happy, and then I thought about it. For some reason they didn't write height or weight. They started calling the unavailable phone. Olga Vasilyevna didn't know any more than he did. She was also worried. Yegor excused himself from his boss and rushed home for 2.5 days on the train at his station. Met Olga Vasilyevna tomorrow. Tanya and the baby are being discharged, she blurted out at the meeting. Why is Tanya silent? The phone still doesn't answer. Egor was worried. Yes, there is something wrong with her phone. Yes. Don't worry, it's okay. They had Tanya and I talking on the landline. Olga Vasilyevna calmed him down. Egor rested from the road. Then he started his old 9, threw away his things to discharge, and ran to the city to get his wife and son. He will never forget. At this moment, when Tanya left for the emergency room with the baby in her arms, my son was in an elegant blue envelope. Bao, and Tanya was so exhausted and pale, and seemed to be trying to smile, but somehow everything was crooked, kissing his wife. "Yes, my dear." Tanya nodded and buried her face in the envelope with her son. "Tanya, why don't you cry? Is it good?" Egor hugged his wife and then picked up his son carefully and smiled. Vanka was sleeping. Vanka was surprised by Tanya. "Yes, let's call our son Ivan, a beautiful Russian name." "Don't mind. Leave him alone," Vanya agreed. Tanya went home. They got home without any incident. "My son behaved calmly, yes, and then it didn't cause any problems for my parents. It grew up healthy and strong." But Igor's first-year dance practically spent the night in his crib hours a day, anxiously listening to whether he was breathing, whether the pain of previous losses echoed, but everything turned out fine. The doctors unanimously said that the baby was absolutely healthy. Our 1% said happy. Egor looking at his sleeping son. "Vanya, my dear." He loved his son so much that he could not express it, and Tanya was now cheerful and happy. She is Vanya's mother. He grew up when he was 2 years old. He was already babbling simple words, but his parents couldn't to understand which one he looks more like. He seems to have blue eyes, like Egor, but his nose is a little upturned, like Tanya's, and his hair is a little curly. But Tanya's Egor is completely smooth. But they forgot about grandfather. Olga Vasilyevna remembered Tanya. Her father's hair was also a little curly. He certainly smiled at Tanya. "Yes, son of all places." Yegor laughed little by little, taking the baby in his arms and throwing him up and immediately catching him. And Vanechka laughed, showing everyone her strong, even teeth. Yes, and now everyone was truly happy. Yegor continued to take shifts and brought good money. They bought a good car. They renovated the house. Tanya's fur coat that Yegor bought for Tanya, and she was still swearing because she didn't care because she was still on maternity leave, and Yegor was laughing. His wife should be the most beautiful, and without a fur coat Tanya couldn't snort, and without a fur coat you hugged your best Egor, but with a fur coat you have no equal, and they both laughed. But fate sent a new test. Tanya got sick, more or less lethargic. Her head hurt. Sometimes she felt nauseous. At first she attributed it all to tiredness. A small child. So many problems. Then she thought that maybe again situation. But no, it was not confirmed. The doctors sent her to the city, and only there they understood the cause of Tanya's illness. They discovered a tumor in the pancreas, and it was already in the 3rd stage. Did not give any results. The doctors said it was too late. The insidiousness of this tumor was that it could not be detected at an early stage. But now it was no longer operable. The doctors suggested a course of chemotherapy, although they honestly said that there was little chance. Upon learning of her diagnosis, Tanya could not believe that everything this was happening to her. No, she can't get sick. She is young, healthy, strong. She has no right to be sick. After all, she has a small son. What would he be like without her? And then came the realization that all this was true, and she would soon die from chemotherapy. Tanya refused. Why did Yegor scream when he came home from Tanya's shift? "There is a chance. You can't do this to yourself. Don't think so about Vanka. Think about me." "Although why should you think about me? You have a small son and he needs you." "He needs this," Tanya replied in echo, "but nothing can be done. You understand that this chemistry will only end me. I will have to be permanent in the hospital. I know this as a doctor, and I want the time given to me to be at home with you." So Yegor cried, hugging his wife, and Tanya cried on his shoulder for a month. She felt more or less like Yegor. It even seemed that the doctors were mistaken. Tanya the Great. She worked so hard. She spent all her time at home with her son, and suddenly she became weak and fell ill. Olga Vasilyevna went to live with them, took care of Vanechka, and she cried softly, realized that her daughter was leaving, and Yegor did not want to believe it. He stayed next to his wife until the end. That last night he approached Tanya. She seemed to be sleeping. Egor adjusted the blanket and sat next to the bed at the table. Tanya opened her eyes and smelled, whispered Tanya, "And where is Vanya?" "He and his mother." "Don't worry, he's going to bed now." Egor answered her affectionately, "You too sleep, dear Egor. I want to tell you when you calm down, said Tanya. You should know that Tanya suddenly gasped and coughed. Egor lifted the pillow and gave her something to drink. Tanya, rest, Egor, I'm leaving. Again Tanya whispered. Vanya, you don't hurt him, please. What are you saying? He is my son and your son. Tanya whispered in our weak voice and closed his eyes. He didn't immediately realize that she was no longer there. He thought she had fallen asleep. And when he touched his lips, he realized that there was no breathing after Tanya's funeral. Alone for a month, got drunk several times. Then he composed himself, guided Vanka's frightened little eyes. I still couldn't understand where my mother had gone. Olga Vasilyevna was crying a lot. She could barely stand with so much grief. She had lived, but she took close care of her grandson. She was always there. Egor once said to his son-in-law, I understand everything, it's difficult for you, but have pity on your son. All I do is wipe my tears. You drink and he's small. He needs your father's attention. Egor seems to have woken up, hid the pain inside himself, started spending more time playing with his son, and it seems to have gotten easier. And Vanka asked less and less about Tanya, gradually forgot. And then Egor returned to the north, hurried the money because Olga Vasilyevna promised to take care of her son, and you will. She told Yegor before leaving, work and don't think about anything. But you will find another woman. Know that I won't resist. I know you love Tanya, but that's life. A man can't have anyone for a long time. I don't need anyone but my son. Egor shrugged, and he didn't really need anyone in the north. He worked and worked. There were women too, and some a lot. The beautiful ones looked at him, but he didn't pay attention to that. All his thoughts were on his son, and when the bosses announced that they would lay off everyone until February, he was very happy. The first in the brigade bought a train ticket and went to Vanka, and before that, at the station, he went into a toy store. And there this beast, a huge polar bear, Yegor, caught fire when he saw him. It was he who gave Vanka money, but he earned money at home normally. He arrived home. Early in the morning, Egor looked at his house. Sleeping son, I admired him. How he has matured in these months. His boy is growing. Tanya should have seen Yegor put him next to the bear's bed and go to the kitchen. Hello, today is a matinee in the kindergarten, Olga Vasilyevna said. While preparing tea. You will, of course, promptly nodded Egor. What time is it? O'clock in the afternoon. Vanka is so looking forward to it. For the holiday he will be a bunny there. I made him a suit and it turned out so beautiful. Thank you. Egor told you, if it weren't for you I don't know what I would have done. But how else? Egorushka Vanechka is the only thing I have left of Tanya. As long as I breathe I will be with you. But remember my words. You will find another woman. I will not resist. Just find one so that Vanka doesn't offend our Olga Vasilyevna loves. I already said you too. No one. I don't need it, Egor said stubbornly. Okay. Let's wait and see. Just Olga Vasilyevna sighed, and then they heard a surprised exclamation from Vanya's room, her scream, and then cry. Egor and Olga Vasilyevna ran to the child. Vanya sat on the bed against the wall and looked at the bear with scared little eyes. Dad screamed when the baby saw his father. You came, and who? Is this a son? That's a toy bear. Are you scared or something? T scared shook his head desperately. Vanka, I was confused. I fell asleep. There was no one but to stay here, so Santa Claus gave this to you. Yegor smiled. I was traveling by train, and then he arrives and says to tell the boy Vanya that he behaved well this year. That's why he got such a big toy, and he didn't give anything else. Vanka rolled his eyes. And what else, Egor? I was confused. Well, hello from Mom. At least that's what I want to see her. I dreamed about her today. Egor didn't respond at all. He just hugged his son closer to him. What can you say? It won't be possible to bring Mom back, even with a wizard as powerful as Santa Claus. Now she will only come to us in dreams, he whispered to the child, then shook himself, smiled, put his son on his lap, and today is his holiday. It's probably time to get ready. Yes, Vanya smiled. It's time to be there like a bunny. Wow, how cool, how good. Vanya suddenly stepped on me. Wanted to be a wolf, and they Sashka will be like an evil wolf and a kind bunny. Egor was surprised. No, yours the role is better. You definitely think with doubt. the boy asked and immediately remembered something else. And they told us that today for the holiday a new boy will come from where he came from. Oh yes, Olga Vasilyevna remembered. A new worker came to the club, the artistic director or something like that. Vasilina, after all, our former artist, ran away on the eve of the holidays, talking to her lover in the city she ran, and there was so much work in the club now the director of the club went to the regional center in tears, asked the cultural department to help this girl, and she sent it from city or something. Her grandmother lives in the regional center and agreed to come to us, and at the club they gave me a room until spring. It has central heating. Today her son is arriving. We haven't seen him yet. We are happy to know that we have a new addition. Just last night she brought him from the regional center. Brought his little son Yegor listened with half his ear. He was not at all interested in this visiting artist. He was thinking about how his Vanka would feel on the holiday. All children come mainly with their mothers. Vanya will also see this, and will remember Tanya. At least he did not start crying. Together with Olga Vasilyevna will look after the boy half an hour before the holiday. Olga Vasilyevna and her son were already in kindergarten. Vanya obediently put on his bunny costume. Close, behind the scenes, they were busy like everyone else. Parents who were also tidying up their children, and then the children all ran into the hall. The teacher Irina Alexandrovna gathered her circle, gave the last instructions on how who should behave. The adults sat on the chairs and patiently waited for the holiday to begin. And where the new one suddenly remembered something from the parents, apparently all of ours confirmed in response. Everyone just shrugged their shoulders, and then a young pretty girl looked into the hall. They hadn't started yet. She smiled at the teacher. We were a little late at Elka school. I am there. Now I helped Pavlik change clothes for minutes and ran to the locker room. Everyone realized that this was the same girl who was sent to help the club's cultural workers. I think her name is Dasha, one of the parents whispered. One with a child, a 4-year-old boy. One asked the other worriedly and looked suspiciously at the door behind which Dasha disappeared and how she behaved. They laughed at her in response. We'll see, but we have to hold our men tighter. Look at how curvy and shiny Egor is. His neighbor, Baba Valya, who came to her granddaughter's vacation, winked at the man. You are the one who organizes everything for me, replied darkly, and no one else dared to say a word to him. Remembering his daughter, Baba Valya realized that she had blurted out something stupid and also frowned and remained silent. The teacher's music began to play. The nannies sat the children in front of the entrance to the participants in the performance, including Vanya. They were brought into the hall. It was funny how the children dressed up as rabbits, mice, foxes, and other animals were pulled by the parents with a string to the exit. Smiled looking at his own, and then the same Dasha and the boy entered the hall. The nanny Anna Sergeyevna took the boy, smiled and was surprised for a second, confusedly turned her gaze to her parents for some reason, looked at Yegor as it seemed to her, and then the woman took the child to an empty chair. Many parents with curiosity looked at Dasha, who was perched in the corner, and did not immediately notice the boy, but Yegor sat down as if he had been hit on the head with a bag. They had just brought in a boy who looked exactly like Vanya. Egor even thought at first that it was his son. The same blue eyes, slightly upturned nose. Only Vanka's hair was cut, only slightly curled on top of his head, and this little boy had a whole head of blonde curls with a cap framing his. Olga Vasilyevna's face was also perplexed. Egor, I don't understand, she whispered. There must be something wrong with my eyes. This boy looks a lot like our Vanya. There must be something wrong with my eyes. She calmly. He looked at Dasha. She sat calmly, smiled at her son, waved her hand, and he smiled back at her. Some parents finally also looked at baby Egor. How the little boy looks like their Vanka, Baba Valya whispered, and added unceremoniously. You are like that. Don't talk nonsense, hissed Egor. He was turned on pins and needles. He wanted to jump out of his chair and immediately find out from this Dasha who she is. But it was stupid for Egor to sit tensely, without taking his eyes off the boy. Many parents also looked at the baby, at his mother, to Egor, and whispered. And then the performance began and everyone was distracted by the tree. Baba Yaga's children were circling. Staged a performance, then the kind grandfather Frost came with the Snow Maiden. Then the children read poems and sang songs. Vanya had fun with all his heart. It was clear that his bunny costume was very comfortable for him and did not bother him at all, none. And then the thief sat down and went out to the tree to dance in a circle, including those who were sitting on the chairs. The novice also went. It turned out that he was tired next to Vanya. They joined hands and pulled into the forest. Born a Christmas tree. Apparently Vanya still felt uncomfortable singing, and he lifted the mask on his forehead. Everyone in the hall again. His eyes were fixed on the two children in the bath, and Pavlik looked like two peas in a pod. Yegor looked at them. The man, completely confused, turned his son's gaze to his neighbor. Then Yegor looked at Daria. From her command and confused face, he realized that there was some kind of secret that he still didn't know. After the holiday, the parents and children gathered in their homes. The children were cheerful. The parents were happy. Only Minnie no to give up. They looked curiously at the mountains with Vanya, and then to Daria with the peacock Olga Vasilyevna, as if trying to close. His grandson will give the eye. She stood nearby helping Vanya. Daria, without looking at anyone, quickly dressed her son. Yegor also pretended that nothing had happened. He decided to talk later without witnesses with this stranger on the way home. Vanka talked non-stop. It was a good holiday, he said with joy. He was eating a frost. The young man gave me so many sweets, and the new boy, you saw, his name is Pavlik. We met him when we were doing a round dance. He gave me a lollipop and I gave him someone's gum. He reminds me, I don't understand. His father and grandmother listened in silence, and only everyone nodded, thinking the same thing at home. Olga Vasilyevna was the first to start a conversation with Egor. Maybe this boy is a double, because they say there are such things. Olga Vasilyevna, do you believe that? Egor trembled his head. I don't believe in these fairy tales. And you saw this Dasha's face. She turned white. I was scared of something. I don't understand anything. Vanka, after all, our Tanya gave birth to him. Maybe she had twins and the doctors didn't notice it, Egor said sarcastically. I understand that this could have happened at the beginning of the dead century, but not now. Tanya was pregnant with a son. Yes, you were right. So how can I explain everything? Olga Vasilyevna looked desperately into the next room where Vanya was sorting a bag of Vanka's sweets. My grandson and my son Egor replied firmly, and now I'm going to this FIFA and find out everything. He jumped from the house on the move. Putting on his jacket almost to the club, he ran without paying attention to the passers-by who looked at him curiously. The whole village was already buzzing that Yegor was at the same time as he lived with someone else. He walked and was also the father of her son, and she arrived now. She would never have thought that he. Maybe Tanya will change, the grandmothers whispered, looking after Yegor. Such a decent guy carried Tanya in his arms. He loves Vanka so much. But it turns out that he is just like everyone else, and look, she knew one thing, and she didn't do it. I died and ran here. Without shame or conscience. I feel sorry for Alya. How is it for her to know now that Yegor was walking? Her daughter lied. Okay, but the children are now like two brothers. So what? Young people are walking and do not understand what comes next. And then everyone in the village has already decided to take the blame with words in the village. It is Yegor's fault. Daria is that girl whom many have already made predictions about before all. Olga. Now Vasilyevna will curse her son-in-law and be right. And it would be even better if she took Vanka to such a worthless man. Like Yegor, you cannot trust your son. And this Dasha needs to stain the doors. Soot or tar. But where can we get it? And the village council chairman will obviously be dissatisfied with the doors. After all, they are owned by the government. And why should he install Dasha in the club like that, to receive? He without knowing the person, and at the same time. In the club room, Daria frantically threw things into a suitcase. Little Pavlik looked at his mother in bewilderment. Mother, I don't want to leave here. The child was babbling, barely holding back his tears. Not the one I like, that children's Christmas tree for me. Santa Claus gave me a gift, my son. I can't stay here. Almost crying, the woman replied, here, we will feel bad. Now the bus will be there in 2 hours. We are going to Baba again in the regional center, and then I'm going to invent something that I don't want. Son, and kissed him on his wet cheek. It won't be long. You and I are going to the city. I'm going to call my aunt. Guys, she'll shelter us. I don't want to leave here. Daria was about to cry with all her might. She could bear it, but she knew that she had to run away from here. Suddenly there was a loud knock on the door. Daria shuddered and looked at the door. She opened it, and on the threshold was the same man from the matinee, who was looking at her the whole time. That boy's father said, good afternoon, I'm Egor. We need to talk. Hello, said Daria with a dropped voice. Not you. Worry. Let's go now. You and your wife don't worry about anything. My wife died. As if Tanya didn't exist anymore, Dasha muttered in confusion. No, yes, who? You are so damned, exclaimed Yegor. How do you know my wife, and how do you explain the fact that our children are like two identical drops? Dasha turned to her son and looked pleadingly at Yegor. I will explain everything to you, just so that the child doesn't hear. Let's go through the auditorium. She turned back to her son Pavlik. My dear, play here, draw your sweets, eat. I'll talk to my uncle now and come. Pavlik, sad, nodded in response. The boy still. I was worried about the possibility that I would soon have to leave here to live with the evil woman Klava. And Dasha entered the auditorium. Egor sat down on the chair. Dasha remained standing. She was organizing her thoughts and didn't know where to start. Yes, it was her secret, and she had lived with it all these years. But it was so hard, it was just unbearable. And today, when she saw Vanka, her heart sank as if in chains. She needs to talk. As you know, my wife, Egor repeated the question. We were lying together in the maternity ward, and you took it away. Our second child. Egor himself didn't believe what he was saying, but he had no other explanation for everything that was happening. The woman almost whispered and gave her second son to his wife at Tanya's house. Then the dead child was born while Yegor screamed, this can't be, Vanka, my son. I don't believe you, but it is so. I'll tell you my story, and you decide for yourself whether it is true or not. And Daria told Yegor without details as clear, but in fact the story was long and sad. Dasha grew up in an orphanage since childhood. Knowing where to study was not a problem. Dasha entered art college as an orphan. She studied in a dormitory. She got a job easily after receiving her diploma. She got a job at the city's Casa de Cultura, and there she was noticed by one of the rich people. He was a sponsor of several events. He was already over years old. And then she was just a girl, years old. But the men couldn't calm down. The girls wouldn't let her pass. He sent her flowers at work, then at the cultural center. Nights when he met with her to disappoint her. This house was offered by Dasha. Such intrusive attention was useless. She refused her boyfriend's persistent advances as best she could. Teased me and sent bouquets of sweets again and again. Invited me to a restaurant. I don't understand you, Dasha told her to her friend Ludmila, who worked as a decorator in the same cultural center. This guy runs after you, and you turn up your nose. Now, if I had something like that, I wouldn't hesitate to run into his arms. Luda, he has a wife and children are already adults. My daughter is the same age. I recognized her, replied Dasha. So that means you are still interested in him. Ludmila blinked. The internet can help. There is everything about this banker Egor Danilovic. His wife has a chain of salons. Beauty, son, student, daughter, years old, works in his bank. What do you care about his family? Let them live as before. And you will also be in chocolate with them there. Apartment. You will get out of his bedbug nest. He will sprinkle gold with diamonds, agree? He is old and disgusting, as he is. But Dasha didn't even want to listen to her friend one day. Dasha was returning home late at night from an event. Suddenly a car stopped on the sidewalk and two strong guys pushed her into the hall. She was taken to a fancy place. Country house, and there Egor Danilovic was waiting for her. The table was set with wine, champagne. The owner himself was only in a dressing gown. Dashenka sat down. The banker pointed to a chair and then served wine. If you do not resist me, You understand? You cannot refuse me. I always get what I want. I will declare that Dasha told the police in a trembling voice. You will be arrested. For which Egor Danilovic laughed loudly. Lungs, because I help the poor fools in this life. Dasha, you really are a fool. I will arrest you and the police. So don't worry. I have all mine there. My most important boss is in debt like silk. So let's drink wine, eat fruit, relax. You and I still have a whole night ahead of us. He enjoyed his power over Dasha. He saw fear in her eyes and it amused him. And then he simply abused her in the morning and put her in prison in the same car with the same brave guys. He put several thousand in her pocket. He said he would call her in the evening, and don't you dare not answer the phone. He hissed in her ear. Now you are mine. I will make you a queen. But if I want, I will destroy you. Dasha cried the whole time. Dasha, don't be stupid. One told her when they arrived home. You can't go against Egor Danilovic. Do as he says, and Dasha was crushed morally and physically. It was so difficult that she wanted to hide. And hide so that no one would find her. But at night there was a knock in her room. Egor Danilovic was on the threshold. His face was well-fed and satisfied, and he was smiling. A fat pig with hatred. Then Dasha thought. She wanted to close the door in front of her nose, but she didn't have time. He got his foot in the door. Get ready quickly. Let's go to me, he said, and winked at the return as it was. Disgusting for the poor girl. But it was you. Egor acted with her like a clever hypnotist. She felt like a rabbit in front of a huge boa constrictor and even went with him. So they met several times. The banker was jubilant. He got what he wanted, and Dasha felt so unhappy, and she also looked dirty. As if I had washed the floor. Egor Danilovic was generous, gave jewelry, flowers. Lyudka, who saw Dasha's new earrings or ring, just sighed with envy. My friend was lucky, and then it was all over just one day. At the dacha where Egor was taking Dasha, his wife appeared during their meeting. She didn't start shouting and making scandals. She just smiled, saying again, You're a husband for old time's sake. Egor grabbed Dasha and literally threw her into the street and then fell at his wife's feet. He owed her a lot of money. He built the business thanks to her father, of course. She forgave him not for the first time, and Dasha, to be honest, she was even happy that it happened like that. Now Egor won't bother her, and he really got tired of playing. He didn't call anymore. He didn't come. Of all people, only Ludmila was upset. The old goat abandoned her friend and Dasha. She finally took a deep breath. It was liberation, the earrings and the ring given by Egor. She initially wanted to throw it away. Ludmila convinced her to take it to a pawn shop. Her friend advised the money not it was extra, so Dasha did it, and in vain. A week later, Egor appeared to her and demanded that all the jewelry be returned, and when she found out that Dasha sold them for almost nothing, he was furious. You will pay me for them. He shouted, your room for sale in the dorm, and you will return everything. Dasha sent him. Finally, she managed to be brave with him. She didn't understand why. She probably just matured early. She was jubilant, feeling free. Soon Dasha felt bad. She felt very nauseous, especially in the morning. Friend, and you asked her the wrong thing, Ludmila. Dasha, and she herself understood that probably the prenatal doctor confirmed everything in her 7th week. She said it was a shock, a complete lack of understanding of what to do. Ludmila gave the address of the clinic where 2 accounts could solve this problem, and Dasha went because she also understood that in this situation this was the most correct option. At the clinic they even gave instructions to stop it. It was supposed to be done 2 days later, but it turned out that at night Dasha had a fever. Her stomach hurt a lot. She was taken by ambulance to the hospital. It turned out to be inflammation of appendicitis. Dasha had an operation, then the recovery period in general. When Dasha came to her senses, it was necessary to interrupt. Is it too late to give birth? And why did anyone need this child? And then Dasha, encouraged, went to Egor and told everything that she was pregnant. He smiled in her face. You are an adult girl and decide your own problems, and I'm no longer interested. But this is your son. Why should I believe you? Who is this mongrel under Zabernea? They didn't laugh at respected people with their bastard, and she was even horrified, realizing that no one would help her in this life. Yes, she will have to solve her problems herself. And a week later, Egor's wife came to her room. She heard from her husband that you were going to give birth here from him, she asked with a vain smile. You must understand that Egor will never recognize this child, and I ask nothing of him or you. Dasha responded, throwing her head back. You are so brave and proud now. Your puppy will be born in a different way, he muttered through his teeth, and through his teeth guessed, then, get out of here. This city so that his spirit is not here. After 3 days, I realized that Dasha was calmly looking at this lady in expensive clothes, and she was not afraid of her. Otherwise you will regret being born, this aunt hissed at her, and she left, slamming the door. But she didn't even take his threats seriously. She lived in peace, and one night 3 masked guys broke into her room, dragged her out of bed and took her out. Some papers from a folder that they brought and forced Dasha to sign there. She still didn't understand what she signed, and in the morning the new owners of her room came and presented purchase and sale documents. In vain Dasha assured that she signed everything under pressure, and without money the police didn't receive her. They didn't even listen to her. They discovered that Dasha was alone on the street, pregnant, without money, where to live at work, and then Luda helped. She rented a small studio, took in a friend, what to do with follow, and there was new impressive news ahead. You are going to have twins, said the doctor at the next appointment. The twins were greeted in tears by Dasha. Why can't I, my dear? The doctor smiled, especially for you. Don't worry so much, you won. You don't even need to give birth alone. Given the recent previous operation, you are recommended for a cesarean section. You will wake up, and you already have 2 dolls. You even left the hospital without finding a way. She got pregnant with a scoundrel and even with twins. So her friend, don't drift, Ludmilla reassured her. When she finds out everything, we will break up. It's easy to tell you that's what I need now. What to do, where to live with 2 children, how to raise them. I can always embarrass you. And you leave them in the maternity hospital. Luda warned that you were serious. Dasha even opened her mouth when she heard such a proposal. Music. No, well, what if you do that? Think for yourself, you don't need them. You wouldn't want them, at least from a loved one or a decent person, or even the last bastard. But these are my children, Luda. I myself grew up in an orphanage, and I don't want this fate for my children. And what's bad for you? Everything was ready, and they also gave me housing, which I lost. She added thoughtfully, Dasha, everything is fine. If you give birth to these children, you will leave them in the maternity ward. A new life will begin. Everything will get better, friend, and you will forget, like a nightmare. Her friend encouraged her, and Dasha understood that Ludmilla was right. Why does she need these children? Who is their father? She shuddered every time, remembering the banker fat. No, nothing should connect them, and Dasha decided to leave the children in the maternity hospital. But as time passed, her belly grew. And with that awakening the young woman's maternal feeling, she gently caressed her belly and smiled when the babies moved inside. No, it wasn't painful. It was even pleasant, like butterflies. Music, beautiful boys, the doctor said at the next ultrasound. The boys are your 2 children to no one. She won't give them up for the birth. Dasha decided that she would change the world, but she would put her children, your feet, they wouldn't grow up in an orphanage. She didn't tell Ludmilla about her plans later. So, for a week before the planned cesarean section, she went to the hospital with Tanya. They met in the ward before the cesarean section. Birth. Tanya also walked the last few days. She was very worried. This is my 4th child, Tanya once confessed to Daria. You have such a big family. Dasha was surprised. Unfortunately, no, the new one said bitterly. A friend in Tanya told her story. This time, everything will be fine. Dasha encouraged her. Tanya only nodded slightly in response. She was afraid to say something so as not to jinx it. One day they took Dasha to surgery, and Tanya with contractions. When everything had ended and Dasha was discharged from intensive care to a regular ward, It turned out that her neighbor Tatiana was lying with her face to the wall and crying softly. Dasha looked at her in alarm and understood everything so badly. She just asked. She cried more than anything. Tanya didn't survive. My son just took a deep breath and died. How can it be? Lord, I begged you so much to save his life, Tanya dear. Don't cry. Dasha herself, wincing with pain, turned to Tanya. Everything will still get better, yes. Nothing will get better, Tanya cried. This is the fourth child I am in mourning, the fourth one. It's not my husband who's afraid to tell my mother. I don't know how to tell them. After all, they're also waiting and hoping. But my son is already in the morgue. It's scary. However, may I feel sorry for Yegor. He wants so much to be a father, but nothing works out because he is the problem. But I will never leave. I will not betray you. Can you imagine telling him that again? Did the child not survive? He had already collapsed before. He drank, feeling his inferiority, and here again. I am strong. I am afraid that Yegor heard his confession and a plan suddenly matured in his head. Gave birth to 2 healthy babies. She hasn't seen them yet, but the doctor said that the boys are completely healthy. But since she and the 2 of them are alone, without housing and without money, I'll give you one of mine, she said in a hoarse voice. She will take you. What are you talking about? Tatiana gasped. Understand. It will be difficult for me to be alone with them. So I live with a friend like a bird. She even advised me to give them to an orphanage and I can't. These are my little bloods. How can I give them to the shelter as puppies? So I think that with 1 baby my friend will still accept me, but with 2 it is unlikely, and so at least in the pool I see you are a good person and, according to your stories, you have a good husband for my son. With this it will be good for you. Well, I agree. I don't know, Tanya whispered in confusion, and all night they didn't sleep. They tossed and turned. One thought whether she could accept someone else's child, and the other whether she would give up her own blood. She wouldn't burst with pain in her heart. In the morning, Tanya shouted to Dasha in a whisper, "Are you sleeping? Aren't you?" Dasha answered briefly, "I decided that I will accept. Only your boy. Let's make sure that no one knows anything, neither your friends nor my relatives, because my husband and my mother gave birth to a healthy child." Yes, I agree. Only the doctor should be informed to change the children's documents. It's difficult, but is it possible to answer Dasha? She remembered that she still had a small gift from Egor, a ring with a diamond. For the pawn shop, she did not take it to the pawn shop, and when Egor demanded that she return the jewelry, she just couldn't find it. The ring under the lining of the bag rolled away, then she found it. Now it could be useful. Can you imagine what you're asking me? The doctor yelled at them in the office when the women told him about their request. Okay, Daria is young and stupid, but you are Tanya. You are also a doctor and you understand this. This is basically impossible, kids, and this is a chance, so go to the orphanage. Take the baby there. The doctor shook his head. No, I can't. But I refuse children. Everything is fine with the head, 2 beautiful boys, as far as possible. The doctor looked at the young woman perplexed. Mom, I can't raise them alone, especially 2. Please don't let me do something irreparable. I'll take 1 child and give the other to Tanya. She's fine. I feel my boy will be in good hands. And she went to the table and put the ring on. Without saying anything else, she left the office, and then Tanya left. They were both in pain and it was difficult. Nothing happened. And an hour later the door opened and the nanny brought 2 packages. Well, mothers, take the babies with joy, said the woman happily. She looked at the label on one and the other and immediately handed a baby to Tatiana and Daria. The women looked at each other in bewilderment, and then each looked at the child. A few moments later, each was already feeding her baby, and he looked like me. Dasha smiled, looking at the sleeping baby. Her arms, and then the smile disappeared from her face. She looked at Tatiana's son. She understood this look and pressed the baby closer to her. You promised, she whispered, paler. I remember. I just wanted to see what he was like. Don't beg, Tanya. Let it be my son. Yes, you're right. It's your son. Dasha whispered and closed her eyes. A tear ran down her face. and she never saw her second child. And at night they were transferred to different rooms. The doctor decided so, and he was right. Why make the unfortunate women suffer yet? Plus, he did what he could to help them when Tanya was discharged with the baby. Dasha was still in the hospital. She stood at the window and saw Tanya walking with her second child to the car. There was a tall man nearby. He smiled happily and said something to Tanya. Then they got into the old 9 and went to where she didn't even know. Tanya didn't say where she came from. She just mentioned that she lived somewhere in the region and that was it. But she didn't even need to know. She decided that her second child would be happy with another family and she would grow up with this baby. The doctor approached her silently. He also watched him leave Tanya. Don't regret it silently? He asked Dasha. The young mother shuddered in surprise. No. She shook her head. She won't be a good mother. I hope you and I girls did the right thing. The doctor sighed and then he took the same ring out of his robe pocket. Take it, you need more, and left the room. And Dasha took care of him with gratitude. What a good doctor. Ludmila took Dasha and the baby from the hospital, of course. Her friend was a little stunned when she found out that. Dasha decided to keep the child, but to be honest, deep down, in her heart she approved her action during this time. Ludmila herself thought a lot about this situation. I even imagined myself in Dasha's place and understood that giving away my child is not so easy. Well, at least I just thought to myself. Ludmila. She even consoled her friend and was surprised how calmly she reacted to the death of the second baby. Ludmila decided that Dasha was even happy. Yes, in her situation it was the best option that Pavlik was growing up. He was a calm and affectionate baby, healthy, and that made him very happy. To his surprise, Dasha realized that she didn't notice her son as Egor's son. It was just her baby, and she did everything so that the boy didn't need anything. When he was 6 months old, she started working and organized corporate holidays at that time with Pavlik. Ludmila was sitting with a friend who turns seemed to be good, but she also had her own life. No, she never reproached Dasha for being embarrassing. The young mother herself understood that she needed to solve her housing problems within a year. She gave Pavlik a 5-day week and began to work twice or even 3 times as much, fulfilled many orders, sometimes went to Luda's apartment and fell of tiredness. But she had to work so that Pavlik had nothing. He didn't need it, and then Dasha realized that at this rate her baby is growing up abandoned and unhappy. It's whoever needs him there in the kindergarten during the 5-day period. And on the weekends when she picks him up again, she has to go to weddings or birthdays. But there is no other way in the culture of the house. Where Dasha worked, she was fired. So they whispered to her in a call from some influential person whom Dasha didn't even ask. She didn't know whether it was Egor or his wife. So she lived in a frantic rhythm with a constant feeling of guilt in front of her son. But one day, everything changed for Ludmila. Far from the regional center. In the regional center, a harmful ant fell ill. She is old, Ludmila told me, but my mother owes her one sister, and after all, my darling used to borrow money from my mother often, and now they can barely walk around the house. No children, no husband, not even a cat. I'm telling you. She's very angry. I asked my mother to take care of her. But what about my mother? Maybe they left there a long time ago for a neighboring area. Neither mother nor father want a social worker. My aunt is after my mother. She calls me. Cry. You don't know what to do, and Aunt Clava doesn't want to live with them either. That's what I thought. What if you go there, and there's a kindergarten and a new club, of course, although it's harmful. It's not Baba Yaga who will take you somewhere and where to go. You and Pavlik will have somewhere to live and find a job, and most importantly, will not let you go after your aunt. She doubted us, Dasha. We are strangers to her later. Oh, that's my problem. I'll convince her. Otherwise, I'll say that I'll rent it to the House of Mercy. Ludmila winked at me. The main thing is that you agree. Probably yes, you agree, Dasha shrugged. I don't have many options, but here I'm so tired and Pavlik constantly cries in the kindergarten. It's difficult because 5 days without a mother is exactly in general. We agreed to call my aunt. Ludmila was delighted. It is not known how Ludmila convinced the obstinate aunt, but she too gave her consent. Although she was very indignant that the woman would be with the child, but then remained silent when she learned that there was another option. Just a shelter for the elderly, and now Dasha and Pavlik were traveling by train. The boy was happy. Will he really see his mother every day now, and not just on weekends? You really won't rent me for 5 days. Period. Sometimes he held back and whispered to Dasha for the 100th time, no. My son never assured me again that his wife Dasha hugged her son and thought that despite all the difficulties she is happy she has a baby, her meaning in life, her joy she hope, and everything will work out for them. Dasha has already thought about her second child, of course, sometimes with pain. She gave her breasts, but Dasha forbade herself any memory of those events in the maternity hospital. She didn't even tell Ludmila anything, and they would never tell her. Her second son didn't survive then, and that was it. They got off at a small station after a huge city. They seemed deafened by the silence, impressed by the image of little houses, narrow streets, but that was out of habit, and this regional center was the most common thing. Thousands of them. Across the country they easily found a wooden house on the right street with carved shutters and an iron fence. That was where Claudia lived. She opened the door for them. A chubby woman of about with a dissatisfied face. Dasha realized to herself that she is not that kind of person and is defenseless. She moves quite tolerably. It wouldn't hurt her to just lose weight, but it's none of her business. Thank you for accepting the shelter. So it's you Lyudka sent me. Subduing her with a look, she said, Claudia, well, live for now, and you'll see from there. There's your room. Go calm down and tell your child to plow and don't run and don't shout in the room. Let him sit, and that's it. And you're the one who sits there too long. Don't sit there too long. It's time. So I can light the stove, yes. There is. Cook. Let's go. Having said all this in a commanding tone, Claudia went to the living room where she turned on the TV at full power. Pavlik wanted to sleep on the road, but you're going to sleep here, okay, son? Be patient. You're going to kindergarten there. You will have a good night's sleep, whispered Dasha's mother. You promised. Pavlik walked away in tears. Mother, you said you won't give me up for a 5-day sentence, and this is not a 5-day sentence. I assured Dasha every night I will take you home. This is where our home is now. You really promise? The child looked at his mother in disbelief. I promise, I smiled. Dasha, I just need to find this kindergarten, and now be quiet. Don't bother Grandma. The boy nodded in response. The room turned out to be cramped with a bed, noisy wardrobes, and a table of 3 legs, a kitten in an old wooden frame. But that was happiness. They had their little corner further on. She quickly packed her things and went to clean, and everything would be fine. Only she didn't know how to light the stove, and she listened Claudia, and she was incompetent and without hands. And why did she listen to Lyudka? Claudia works at the stove and understood everything the first time, and then cooked the borscht. It's very tasty. Claudia ate 2 portions. Pavlik also ate well from the road, but Dasha herself was so tired that she just pecked like a bird. Okay. Eat normally, said Claudia, but your son eats like a horse passing me. You are completely offended, so he is very small. He is just hungry from the road. Don't worry. I will buy food with my own money. I will go to work. Pavlik will go to the garden. Let's not bother. I didn't understand. Claudia was confused. How to work and take care of myself. I'll have time for everything. In the morning I was sitting. I'm going to make something to eat, and I'm going to cook, and I'll come back in the evening. Luda told you then, she said grumpily, replied Claudia. The devil pulled me in taking strangers into the house. Lyudka is an infection, and mumbled something else. She went to her room. Idiot. I'm afraid of her, whispered Pavlik. Don't be afraid, good grandmother. Just mumbles a little smile at Dasha, although she was also anxious in her soul is very inhospitable. That's Claudia. The next day, she went to the local Casa de Cultura, then to the daycare center at the cultural center, and was only offered the position of cleaning lady, and then, because no one came for these pennies there, even at night, when the disco had to work for free in the locker room. But they promised to take Pavlik to the kindergarten immediately. All that was needed was local registration, and where to get it, some kind of cruel circle. Dasha decided as long as she took her son with her, she would work as a cleaner. What can she do? Of course, this wasn't what she dreamed of. But how did Dasha's new life begin? He got up at o'clock in the morning, prepared breakfast for the housewife, then lit the stove, then ran to the nightclub while his son was sleeping and cleaned there. Pavlik would come to his room for dinner, sit in the living room, draw, or play with cars, just quietly. Dasha would teach him not to disturb his grandmother until the evening. His wife would take care of the house and then go back to work, taking Pavlik with her and coming back many times. Sometimes they returned after midnight, when the club closed after all kinds of events and discos. The head of the club, Alla Grigorievna, turned a blind eye to the fact that the new cleaning lady often took her son with her, saw that the girl was doing her best, and besides, she was a polite colleague. So you have to be patient, Alice said. How? As soon as a vacancy appears, I will find you a job and find a place in the kindergarten for a month or two. Wait. Dasha is grateful to her. She smiled and lived like that in November. It became difficult for Pavlik. Go work with her. Carrying it at night is cold. After all, I decided to walk down the street and talk to the owner. He won't bother her, she assured Claudia. She would sit in the living room and everything. All good. Let the old woman have courage. You did everything right. The house is warm, clean, always delicious, and there are lots of things prepared. And the boy will control him if anything happens. At first, she didn't notice anything, but then she realized that her son had become somewhat shy, and somehow she saw bruises on his arm. It turned out that the old woman was punishing him for every extra step, pulling his ear or giving slapped him once. Pavlik forgot to play and went to her room and climbed into bed. Then the old woman pinched his arm several times, pinched him on the crayon, which seemed to him a crime. It was Dasha's son who later told him when he saw the bruises why you were silent, almost crying, asked Dasha. I was afraid to upset you. Not childishly seriously. Pavlik replied, it's already difficult for you. Dasha had a big fight with Claudia at that time, and the old woman didn't like any answers. Go away. And then it seemed that you were even lucky in one of the villages, just before New Year, that the position of artistic director became vacant. Seriously? You will have to live in the club, you will? Asked Alla. I will, answered Dasha decisively. On the same day, he called Ludmilla, explained the situation with his aunt friend. Apologize. Don't apologize, sighed Ludmilla. Still, I have to ask your forgiveness for an aunt like that, but now let him live as he wants, it seems to me. She is more foolish than sick, Dasha said then. But she will live alone. Ludmilla smiled. The next day Dasha and Pasha left for the village. Oh, and he cursed for Claudia. The ungrateful Dasha lived with her like cheese and butter, but more than Claudia, of course, regretted Dasha's free help, and furthermore, the tenant paid for her to stay in the village. Dasha liked the street. There were many new houses, and the people were friendly. The club director brought her antique furniture in your room. She personally rushed to the kindergarten and arranged for a new child. The employees took him there. Let him go to the Christmas tree tomorrow, said Larissa, the head of the club, and kept her eyes on the audience who were sitting on a chair and looking curiously at her new home with her mother. He looks like you, and Dasha smiled. There is a similarity with someone else, Larissa remembers, thinking, okay, all children are somehow similar to each other. Shelter, for help, contact me. Larissa blinked and ran away to go about her business, and the next day Dasha went there. Christmas tree to the kindergarten with her son, and there was an unexpected meeting. Of course, she didn't tell Yegor in detail about her life. She just said that she was left almost on the street without money, pregnant with twins, how she met Tanya and decided to give this step. She also told how she wanted to improve her life in a new place. Let's go with the peacock, she said, wiping her tears. I won't disturb your life. Now let's get on the bus and go somewhere, but at least where I understand that we are talking about unnecessary things here now. People will see how similar the boys are. I think the conversations are no longer going well. Egor smiled. He was lost in thought. Vanka is not his homeland. Egor still could not believe it, but he remembered how he met Tanya in the maternity hospital, how lost and upset she was then. She looked at him as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't say it even before his death. She obviously wanted to confess that she didn't dare or didn't have the time. It was more painful because Egor was sitting with his head down. Dasha stood on the opposite side. She leaned her back against the wall and cried, remembering the event again. In her life, yes, not everything worked out for her. She was sorry for Pavlik. Where should they go now on New Year's Eve? In the city where Ludmilla will receive them? But does she have her own life and? Looks like she has a man. Claudia Pavlik suffered a lot from this evil old woman, but Claudia has nowhere else to go. If only I could accept it. Pavlik looked into the corridor, looked with surprise at his crying mother. Sad Uncle Mom, I want to eat, he said gloomily. Oh, yes, my son cheered up. Dasha, now I'm going to the store to buy sausage and eggs. Let's fry quickly because soon we have a bus. She took off, but Yegor stopped her. The store is no longer open, the man said. Yegor got up and walked to Dasha, looked into her eyes. But where are you going? It seems escape. Here it is, escape, Dasha whispered. But there is no other way. But get ready to come to us. Egor suddenly suggested that Olga Vasilyevna would cook borscht for you today. She became even more confused, but as Egor accepted Dasha's hand and looked at us, her eyes again. You don't want to see him and talk to him. Dasha lowered her head. She understood who Yegor was talking about. She really wanted to see her Vanechka, to see how he lives. She wanted to hug him. But is it possible? One day she made her choice. Do I really want to whisper her? So let's go. Egor said a little sharply. Stop thinking your son is hungry. Somehow imperceptibly he moved to you. They walked around the village without noticing how all the gossips looked after them. Who from the window, who from the yard. But Yegor didn't had absolutely nothing to do with it. There was only one thought in his head: is he doing the right thing by allowing Dasha to see Vanka? Vanka is his son. Although they are blood relatives, Egor is raising him and is not going to give him to anyone. He will not regret such an impulse. And also Olga Vasilyevna, who still knows nothing, was known as Olga Vasilyevna in the hallway. She stared at the guests, at Egor. Dasha stood hesitantly on the threshold, holding Pavlik against him. The boy looked curiously at the new house. This sweet lady, she clearly did not resemble the evil woman. Klava. Egor, explain, Olga Vasilyevna said in confusion. What kind of guests are we? These are Daria and her son Pasha. Introduced them. Egor, Olga Vasilyevna, the boy is hungry. He needs to be fed, and Dasha is probably hungry. No. I shook my head, dieting. The woman Egor just waved her hand, not accepting excuses. Mother, feed them quietly, asked Olga Vasilyevna. Was surprised once again. Egor treated her very well, but all these years anyway, he didn't call her mother, and suddenly it exploded from him. What happened then? Friends, wash your hands, and a woman commanded the table and went to the kitchen. Soon Vanya joined them, and when Vanya saw Pavlik, he smiled happily. Hello, you. Pavlik came to visit us and just nodded in response. He spoke a little. Vanya. Olga Vasilyevna also called her grandson to the table. The boys ate with gusto and then ran to Vanya's room. Huge bear. They threw him from side to side, tried to climb on him. They laughed like. Then the adults immediately became friends, sitting in the kitchen, listening to the boys fuss, and everyone could not decide to be the first to start a conversation. Yegor, I'm listening, Olga Vasilyevna finally said. I don't know how to say it, while Egor shook his head. Yes, speak now. Olga Vasilyevna almost screamed. Pasha is an exact copy of Vanya. Did Tanya really leave a child in the maternity ward? No, I don't believe it. It's all wrong. I gave birth to Vanya and Pavlik too. They are twins. When Olga Vasilyevna heard this, she turned pale and clutched her heart. The news was shocking. It means your daughter deceived everyone. And Dasha spoke, and Tanya said she wanted to explain. Dasha better understand. She was not thinking to herself about motherhood. She was afraid to imagine how you would react. Olga Vasilyevna is very much for Egor. She was worried. She couldn't tell that she had lost a son once again, and here I am. I have healthy twins, and it seems like I should be happy, but I can't not go with the boys. I have nowhere to raise them. There is nothing and I can't give it to an orphanage. I grew up there knowing that it wasn't sugar that I invented and offered to Tanya. Then I talked to the doctor and God knows I would never appear in your life. But the circumstances ended up like that for some time half unknown, I ended. Up in your village, you're lying, Olga Vasilyevna shouted. You want to take our boy away. I won't give him back. You're wrong. The last thing I want is to take Vanya away from you. Now I see how good he is with you. But Pavlik can't give him anything. I'm not very happy with anything in my life, and it hurts a lot, but I can handle it. I can do this. I didn't want to tell you anything, but Yegor insisted that Dasha was silent, and then said pleadingly, let me hug Vanechka, and we will leave with Pavlik. Olga Vasilyevna did not answer anything. She turned to the window and thought that Yegor was silent. Tanya, why didn't you say anything? So you felt sorry for both of us, Yegor and Olga Vasilyevna, and both did not know what to do next. But Dasha listened carefully to how the boys were playing in the room. Can I go to them quietly? Get out, the woman shouted. I'm not going to give you my grandson so you won't talk now, no matter how hurt you made him. Get out of our house. She didn't answer anything else. More. It made her look very small, like a child. She went to the door, looked back. Can she call Pavlik? Shyly, she asked Yegor. He went over the room and then froze on the threshold. The boys stopped at the mirror and looked at their image. Pasha, you have the same eyes as mine, Vanya said thoughtfully. Yes, Pavlik agreed. And the hair is the same, only mine is longer. Vanya, or maybe we are brothers. But the adults remained silent, so that the conversation was clear. The boys all heard. No, it's not like that, Vanya reasoned. His brothers have the same mother, but we have different ones. Pasha, you are happy. Your mother is alive. And my grandmother in heaven told me this. But you have a father, and what a house. Pavlik sighed. Listen, you come. I will be visiting more often. Let's play well. Pasha was happy. Then I remembered. We are leaving, my mother said. I don't want to. Dasha couldn't bear to listen to Pasha anymore. Come on. It's time for us to go, she shouted from the front door. Pavlik obediently ran out and got dressed. Vanya came out to say goodbye to him. They even said goodbye to you with a hug. Be sure to come to me again, said Vanya. Pavlik smiled sadly. Everything did not depend on him, and the kid understood that this Pasha was generally mature beyond his years. In the yard, Yegor talked with Dasha. Dasha, you are not offended by Olga Vasilyevna. Understand us. It is also very difficult now to understand and accept everything, but it is doubly difficult for her. She buried her daughter. But Vanya is confused. I understand, Dasha nodded. It's out tomorrow. Don't worry, we'll go. And she took her son tightly by the hand and left the yard. Dasha went down the street and tears flowed from her eyes. That everything ended like this, she and only her. The second son was nearby, and they didn't even let her touch him. Yes, it's all her fault, and why are you crying? She whispered to herself that you give this to him. You're just pulling one thing. Pavlik looked at his mother in surprise and didn't understand why she was crying alone and talking. He only realized that his mother was very upset, and so he grabbed her hand tightly and whispered to the boy. They had already returned to their locker at the club. I love you very, very much, said Dasha, wiping her eyes. You will see. And in Yegor's house that night the light was on. Yegor and Olga Vasilyevna sat in the kitchen for a long time. They had already talked about everything 1,000 times. Now they sat silently, and each of them did not know what to do in the future. Tanya left the task to them. Vanka was snoring in his room in the living room. The garlands on the tree were blinking. In a day it would be New Year. But it was not at all cheerful. Olga Vasilyevna went to her room and fell into a heavy sleep. Egor left. It was one frosty night. Drops of stars flickered in the dark sky as if they were trying to tell Yegor something. He breathed in the rich, fresh air, but he could not breathe. There was something pressing in his chest, resentment, pain, lack of understanding, confusion. How come he seems to be a father and not his father to Vanka, but right next to him is the same boy too? Like Vanka. Yegor suddenly. I realized that he was already worried about this second boy, just like his son. As he fell asleep in that club closet, it was cold there and mice could probably run around. But with that second boy there was another woman, a stranger to Egor, and in the ocean, somewhere far away, an owl hooted, a dog Egor barked. He rubbed his temples and picked up the empty pack. He didn't even notice how he had smoked every last one. His head felt heavy and empty. A man sighed heavily and entered the house. Nothing. He still couldn't figure out how to continue living with this truth. And in the morning he dreamed about Tanya. She smiled at him, gently stroked his hair and was silent, silent Egor. He looked at his wife and had a complete feeling that she was alive. Tanya, how to continue to live, he asked her. She did not answer anything. She smiled again. Then suddenly it became lighter and brighter and became transparent, like a fog. A cloud moved away just alive. I heard her. The voice had already come from afar, and be happy. Yegor opened his eyes next to him. Apparently he sneaked in at night and Yegor didn't feel him. He covered himself with a blanket and kissed him. Of course he is Vanka's real father. With this thought, he is careful. Got out of bed and went to the kitchen. Olga Vasilyevna was baking pancakes. Her eyes were suspiciously red. She was crying. Yegor looked at her carefully all night. She didn't sleep properly. She was thinking. Olga Vasilyevna sobbed. As we should continue living and I was thinking about it. Yegor and Gorushka admitted. That's what I want to say. Don't judge Tanya. Don't be offended by her. She wanted the best. I know that, and so, one thought doesn't give me peace, because at sometimes fate gives us a sign and we do not immediately understand what is required of us. Dasha, it may be for a reason that she appeared here. No, that's not what I'm talking about. That's we. I was looking for Vanka. She wants to take me away. I realize that this is not the case. She is also a poor, unhappy girl who had to make difficult decisions alone. But it so happened that she ended up in our village, 2 brothers. Met, so maybe it's good that they saw each other when they were little, and now they will meet. I don't understand why you were surprised. Egor, and besides the brothers should grow up together. Egor froze. What is she saying? She wants. Say that he would give Vanka to Daria with his own hands. Olga Vasilyevna understood everything from Egor's look and waved his hands. No, no, what are you saying? I won't give Vanka to anyone. But here is the second boy, Pasha. He is just like my grandson. I won't be able to sleep peacefully knowing that he is wandering somewhere. Olga Vasilyevna expressed Yegor's thoughts, and he just listened and was silent. It seems to me that Dasha is not a bad girl, Egor, and if you come to terms with her, you, Olga Vasilyevna, I don't need anyone except Tanya. I just loved her, and I love her. My daughter cannot be returned, and Vanka needs her mother. Olga Vasilyevna answered with a sigh. Think about it. Egor just shook his head and left. It was already early morning in the yard. He opened the carriage and went out into the street. People were running past to get to the regular bus stop 50 meters away. Yegor saw at the stop the figure of a woman with a child next to a big handbag. It was Dasha with a peacock. Yegor quickened his pace. He walked towards Daria without fully realizing what he was doing when he saw him. Sleepy, Pavlik staggered to a step, snuggled close to his mother. Yegor approached and greeted people. There were about 10 people at the bus stop, and everyone looked at the man curiously, and he silently took Dasha's bag. Let's go to us, Egor said quietly. Dasha's voice trembled. To live, simply to live and raise our children, Yegor said clearly. The people at the bus stop heard this and froze. But then there was no time for strangers with Yegor. Each other, the headlights flashed, the bus stopped, people started to stir, and only these 2 mom remained standing. She heard Pavlik's voice. We're not going anywhere, and there was so much hope in the child's voice. You're not going anywhere, Yegor answered for her, picked up the boy with his free hand, squeezed the bag tightly with the other, and walked towards his yard. After a little hesitation, Dasha followed him, and the people on the bus watched them with interest, discussing what was happening and wondering whose boys they were celebrating that new year. In the friendly company of Egor, Dasha, Vanya, Pasha, and Olga Vasilyevna, the boys were happy to be with them. Now living together, Dasha was ashamed of her all the time. It was unusual in the new house with Egor and Olga Vasilyevna. Who is she here? Why? And just looking at the boys, her face lit up with a smile. She took turns kissing Vanya and then Pasha, and she understood that this is happiness. Running around, screaming and laughing. Two of her two little blood Vanya surprisingly easily and simply found a language with Dasha and whispered lightning in a minute in Olga Vasilyevna's ear. Grandmother and Aunt Dasha will definitely live with us. Olga Vasilyevna responded with a nod. What if I call her mother? My mother Tanya will not just be offended by her. Pasha calls her mother, and I really want to ask emotion. Baby, Tanya's mother will not be offended, his grandmother assured him, and Vanka ran to Dasha and hung around her neck. Mom shouted. Mom Pavlik froze for a second in surprise, and then he also ran to hug Dasha and her. Hugging them both, she laughed and cried, and Egor looked at them thoughtfully. But Olga Vasilyevna was right. Life goes on. Maybe everything will work out for him and Dasha. In a month, Egor entered a shift with Dasha. Them had only friendly relations. She often called him and told him how the boys were, how she worked at the club. In fact, she really liked working in a rural recreation center, people who at first received her with caution and even surprise. Finally, I came to her for classes. Vanya and Pasha went to rehearsals, went to kindergarten, and no one else was surprised. There's similarity in the village. No secret can be kept. Everyone already knew what happened. Different people talked a lot, but in the end, everyone agreed everything that is done for the better. 3 months later, Yegor returned from shifty. He stayed at home. The chairman of the village council offered him a job. He agreed. He was already tired of these shifts, and Yegor missed the boys. Now he really thought that he had 2 sons. How else could they look? So similar that even their hairstyles became similar, but they are still Yegor and Dasha and Olga Vasilyevna. They also unambiguously determined where Vanya was and where Pasha was. Vanka was bolder, even a little bold, and Pasha was more and more careful. But on the other hand, he could not distinguish his brothers. But as before, Dasha and Yegor were just friends. Even though they lived in the same house, every day they understood that they were attracted to Egor. They stopped each other with the memory of Tanya, and Dasha was simply shy after all. In truth, she did not know true love. One day in August, at the end of summer, they went to the forest to pick mushrooms. The children wandered around the clearing together with Olga Vasilyevna. Egor went to one side of the forest. Dasha suddenly went to the other. Egor. I heard her scream more and ran to her aid. Then the wolf screamed even more, pointing to the thicket. The wolf was surprised. Yegor actually doesn't have such animals. Well, who is he then? The gray one. And suddenly a huge hare jumped out of the bush, died of fear and ran towards the hare. Ran away. Dasha laughed and blushed, and I was thinking, yeah, you coward. Egor smiled and unexpectedly hugged Dasha, and then kissed Dasha. Shivered, but did not push away. The man shyly replied, how grateful I am to this hare. Egor whispered why. Dasha was surprised. If not for him, I would be afraid to kiss you for another 1,000 years. And they kissed again, and from afar the boys looked at them and looked at each other. Mom and Dad kissed. Olga Vasilyevna also looked at them and just smiled. Finally, these two will be happy, and she had no grudge against Yegor. He just had to live this happy life for me and for his daughter. And in November, Dasha and Egor got married. Now they have become a real family. And a month later, Dasha realized that she was pregnant. When Egor found out about this, he was so upset. Dasha, dear, you can't give birth to this child, he said bitterly. Remember what Tanya and I had. But even stubbornly shook his head as fate would have it. So it will be, and she will not become a judge of her unborn child. The pregnancy occurred easily, and the closer the birth became, the more worried Yegor. Olga Vasilyevna, who lived with them and to whom Dasha became as a daughter, she too was worried. Could this girl repeat her daughter's fate? And only Dasha was calm. But she was working at the club for the last month, taking care of the children, taking care of the house, and 2 weeks before the birth, Yegor took her away. She to the city, to the maternity hospital. The doctors, knowing about the difficult situation, insisted on giving birth in the city. Dasha called early in the morning. Our daughter was born. She whispered into the phone. Her daughter Egor woke up instantly. Dasha, why did you? It's whispering like that. Our baby is sleeping next to me. It's okay. It's okay. See him. Egor couldn't believe this miracle. It was really that 1%, the only one. So he took Dasha and her daughter from the maternity hospital. They arrived at home. They were welcomed by Olga Vasilyevna with the boys, and we decided what to call my sister. Vanya told them at the door, and how she smiled. Dasha. Tanya, answered Pasha, and everyone agreed, of course, with Tanya. And may she be the happiest. 2 years passed. Tanya grew up as a strong and healthy girl. Dasha had already gone to work. Pasha and Vanya were already studying at school. One day, a luxurious foreigner car stopped near their house, and a young Olga Vasilyevna got out of it. I was just busy with my granddaughter in the yard, seeing a stranger. An elderly woman went to meet him, taking Tanya in her arms. Excuse me, but Daria lives here. They told me in the store that a woman said in this house. Who are you? Olga Vasilyevna looked in surprise at this well-groomed and ragged girl. Yes, maybe no one. But I need to see her. Olga Vasilyevna wanted to send her away, but she didn't have time to go further at home. You went further. Daria was delighted. The girl, let's say. Who are you? Dasha raised her eyebrows. Somehow she didn't recognize this girl. My name is Snezana, and I am the daughter of Egor Danilovic. Does this name tell you anything? Dasha answered sharply and blushed slightly. You made a mistake. Go away. No. How did you? Exclaimed Snezana. I have been looking for you for so long. Listen, I am fine. Intentions. And Snezana, hesitant and worried, said that a year ago her father died in an accident. Somehow in a conversation her mother mentioned that her father once greatly offended a girl and then also took away her only home. My mother said that the girl was pregnant. I just imagined what it was like, and poor thing. Snezana shook her head. Without money with her son, and I felt so ashamed of my father. How he didn't understand. And my mother. She was also mistaken. She forgave her father for everything. Treason and his lover Sveta was ready to live. I understand others, but this is a girl. I was so offended and decided to look for her. It cost me a lot of work, but I have a good detective and he found the building. I know that you gave birth to my father. You have 2 twin sons. It seems that they are my brothers. I would like to help you. I wonder how. Dasha finally said before she was silent and listened to Snezana. With money. Of course, she smiled. Snezana, tell me where to transfer and I will do everything that Snezana won't do. I need something from your family. Daria replied firmly. Please leave. Otherwise I will call the police. Daria, you shouldn't do this. We can do it well. Communicate. I can take the boys to my house for the weekend. We're going to have a lot of fun with them. I can even take them to the sea, because it's great. I honestly think so, and I repeat once again, we don't need anything from you. Well, that's it in vain. But I'll be back. Snezana probably sat with her shoulders in her beautiful car, and Daria and Olga Vasilyevna left, stood at the gate and looked after the car. I don't understand why I need this, asked Olga Vasilyevna. For her sins. She decided to pray for Father. Angry, Dasha responded angrily. Then she calmed down a little and smiled. It's better to go to church. And then Olga Vasilyevna correctly agreed, and a month later it became known why Snezana came. All TV channels showed that the daughter of a famous banker was detained at the airport with someone else's son. It turned out that this Snezana had a sick son. He needed an urgent kidney transplant, and the donor could only come from his closest relative, was also a child. So she was looking for his father, who was also a womanizer, and Snezana decided to look among his ex-lovers, which she also discovered Dasha. That's why she came and offered the boys to the sea. She was guided by good intentions to bring back dark thoughts. When Dasha refused, she found another woman who also gave birth to Egor, and Snezana also managed to find an approach to her. She offered to take her son to sea abroad. The woman agreed only at the last moment. One of the well-wishers called, and that's it, I told him. Luckily, Snezana didn't have time to take the child abroad. Now she is in prison and her son got help, so a donor was found, and without everything. So, when Dasha found out this whole story, she was so scared. What kind of black people are there? How scary for our boys. She said to Yegor, what fate awaits them. This Egor's blood runs through his veins. God forbid his character to appear so. What? Yegor shakes his head. What difference does it make? Blood. They are our children, my children. I am raising them, and they will be similar to me. Like me? So they will be. Yes, you are right. Children follow the example of their parents, and you are the best father for our children. And Yegor laughed at his daughter, and at Tanya. They two sat in the nearby yard, on the grass, playing. His daughter Pavlik and Vanya for the first time repaired the bike. Olga Vasilyevna was in the kitchen baking her signature pancakes. The aroma was divine. Soon Olga Vasilyevna would call everyone to the table. Everyone was waiting, and clouds floated in the sky, and someone was invisibly close from above. I was fine with this family because they've been through a lot. They've been through a lot. Now they just have to be happy. Was the Zorg watching from the sky, or was it her?